Hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone. So I am Alex,
And I'm Megan.
and we are two Gothic horror academic scholars who are interested in the medieval in morbid media.
Yes, and this is where we're going to unpack that. Welcome to Dames Macabre.
So we're going to be opening Dames Macabre with a joint watch of Buffy, and we're going to be using our medieval expertise to unpack what's going on kind of behind the scenes in the Buffyverse.
Yes, so we, for this episode, watched the two-part opener. So, Welcome to the Hellmouth and The Harvest. And there's a lot in these two episodes for us to grapple with and unpack because these are the episodes that set the mythology of Buffy. So there's a lot there. Some weeks will be nerdier than others, I think,
I
Alex.
think so. Yes, very much so. And I have so many questions about this pair of episodes that I'm so excited to ask you in particular. The people who aren't aware, Megan's entire thesis is on blood and Buffy. So she is, of the two of us, the biggest expert in the medieval inheritance in Buffy. But fear not, I was into Buffy as a child in the 90s, and I bring rabid nerdery to the discussion. So
Yeah, I think it's a really good balance because I didn't grow up watching Buffy as you did. It was something I came to much later in life. And then, if I wrote a PhD thesis on it, obviously it took over everything. So I know it incredibly well now, but I don't have that nostalgic component of it as much as you will. Obviously, there are things where I'm like, that's so 90s, but also I don't have the, romantic interest kind of growing up thing because I was already in my 20s, so I didn't have that direct relation. Once we get into that, that'll be really interesting. I
yeah,
think that agree to disagree, I think is going to happen quite a bit.
yes. And I think I'm going to be having some. Also, I have to apologize for any listeners who could hear meowing going on there. This is my cat Cora. She has just decided from napping the entire morning that now is the time to
Yeah,
be
thankfully
disruptive.
Buffy's in his bed next to me, so we'll see if that doesn't.
Yeah. But
But
yes, it's going to be really wild for me rewatching Buffy as a grown-up because, of course, when I was, again, a child in the 90s, idolizing this teenage girl, some of the more problematic aspects were invisible to me then, but are very clear now, and that is going to be an adventure to explore.
yeah, and before we kind of really get going, a few bits right directly at the top. So, first of all, want to say that we're going to do our best to be spoiler free,
Yeah.
but sometimes we make mistakes, and Buffy is a very hard show to be spoiler free on. So, we'll kind of give warnings with that. Hopefully, in the future, if this gathers momentum, we can kind of do spoiler-free episodes. But at the moment, I am our sound editor, and let's just say that I'm more on the side of Giles and dread machines and dread technologies rather than being a whiz.
Yeah.
And our second kind of thing of business before we get going is we both think a fundamental and essential disclaimer regarding series creator Joss Whedon.
Yes.
So, stealing this from my thesis, because obviously I had to grapple with this in the thesis. So, if those of you who don't know, we'll share some information and links. Joss Whedon has become an increasingly controversial figure. Any mention of Joss Whedon throughout this podcast is as the series creator and sometimes director writer. We do not condone any of the sexist, misogynistic, racist, or other problematic behavior of Joss Whedon, alleged or otherwise. So, right off the top
Right off
there.
the top, we are big fans of Buffy. As I was saying to Megan earlier, I can't extract Buffy from who I am as a person. I grew up with it. It got me right in the formative years. But I will not try and hide from the fact that Joss Whedon is hugely problematic, and that has to be included in my rewatches of Buffy now and my understanding of Buffy, the TV show now. So as we go on, we may occasionally be acknowledging some of the more problematic aspects. We also intend at some point to maybe do a mini episode where we unpack whether or not you can separate the artist from the art, how we navigate engaging with Buffy whilst being aware of what was going on in the background that we weren't aware of, or I wasn't aware of, obviously, watching it the first time round. So,
Yeah. And
we
a small like aside or addendum to that is also the fact that we're discussing a series that was released in the late 90s, so 1997, to 2003, so there is inescapable moments of awkwardness and misrepresentation and the like. So we will do our best to address those when they come through, but of course, again, we're not perfect. And so just like how the British Library for their Tales of the Weird has a disclaimer at the beginning that they include the language of stories, that were written at the end of the 19th century and early 20th to maintain the integrity. We will, deal with those aspects of Buffy, but so it's just part of the series. It's an, memento, an artifact of its time. And so just keeping that in mind when you're listening to something in an early 21st or 21st century perspective, listening back to something.
Exactly. And just because we acknowledge that it was of its time doesn't mean we'll let it off the hook. And therefore,
No,
it
yes.
was of its time. So, listeners, don't worry. We know we have your backs.
We
So
do.
that's the heavy stuff. And I think we should segue into something a little bit cheerful as you've just picked up your mug.
Yes, so Alex and I have noticed that we have really fun, good mugs. I generally use the same one, but Alex apparently has a mass rotation. Dear listeners, I have a mug that is from New Orleans when I went with my partner a few years back, and it says, Bury me above ground in New Orleans. And then it's got a series of the crypts and mausoleums that can be found throughout New Orleans cemeteries, especially, St. Louis Cemetery number one, which is where Nicolas Cage has his pyramid double allotment for his future tomb. Yes, I've taken photos there many a time. And
Just
so, yeah. And Alex, what's your mug of the week this week?
I have my medieval bat mug. So this is from a little Etsy shop called The Hum from the Hill, and this was bought for me by a friend.
Well, look at them. Medieval bats, dear
Medieval
listener.
bats. It's just a grid of little cuttings of all kinds of medieval bats from illuminated manuscripts and the like. And some of them are accurate, some of them are trying their best, and therefore adorable.
Yeah, dear listeners, definitely Google medieval bats in illuminated manuscripts because they are cute and fun. And even when they are trying, they're not as bad as some of the other infamous medieval illuminations.
Absolutely. Okay, so
Time for business.
time for business. You know who we are, you know what we think of Joss Whedon, you know what mugs we're drinking from. Let's
Yep.
welcome to the Hellmouth and Harvest.
Yes. And both episodes are written by Joss Whedon. Welcome to the Hellmouth is directed by Joss Whedon, if I recall correctly, but The Harvest is not. Let me pull it up on IMDb. I should know this,
I
but
think it was directed by Joss. Oh no, because I'm just recalling what I saw on my DVD yesterday. I have no actual solid information.
we should also definitely watch the unaired pilot. It's on YouTube. It's,
Isn't that the one with the different Willow?
yeah, and it's bad.
This is
They
something,
did a vast improvement once they.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something that I've got to acknowledge. Love Alison Hannigan, think she makes an adorable, perfect Willow, but I
Mhm.
can't help but notice that they had a less cute and sprightly actress playing the first Willow.
Mhm.
She was a little bit fuller figured, and I can't help but notice that Joss Whedon definitely prefers the waifish girls, which is a problematic aspect we'll pull up. So I was always a little bit sad that the
Yeah,
body diversity instantly got chopped from the pilot episodes.
yeah, but I do think that, logistically it was the correct choice, not for the body image thing, but just there's better chemistry with
Oh yeah,
Sarah Michelle Gellar and Allison Hannigan. But yes,
this is it. She is absolutely. I can't picture a different Willow. I can't, and I can't even remember if the original actress was that scintillating as an actress. I think you're right about the chemistry. The chemistry just wasn't quite there. She felt a little bit wooden, but then, yeah.
yeah. So according to IMDb, Welcome to the Hellmouth was directed by Charles Martin Smith,
Okay.
and then uncredited Joss Whedon, and then The Harvest, so kind of part two, was directed by John T. Kretschmer. And I believe that's a name that occurs a few more times in season one. So we'll be better in the future having this kind of information. I do think it's important to credit the writers when we get multiple writers and the directors because Buffy was a stepping stone for a lot of television writers and directors. So I think that it's always fun to kind of see names we recognize. But now for a real challenge, Alex, summarizing.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to do one of the episodes and I'll do one of the other episodes? How do we want to do
Yes.
this?
We can split it.
Okay.
Should I do Welcome to the Hellmouth then, and then
Sure.
you do the Harvest?
Sure. Now, I know that we say that we're not going to be doing like wide spoilers, but of course there will be spoilers of these two episodes in this episode of the podcast. We're
Yes.
not cushioning anything about these two episodes here. So watch the episodes first, come back, listen to the podcast.
Yes. Unless you like spoilers, then feel free to do whatever you'd like.
Live your best life.
Okay, so Welcome to the Hellmouth aired mid-season. It aired on March 10th, 1997. So that's just important to know because the first season's only 12 episodes. So kind of just like a little contextual starter. So Welcome to the Hellmouth is our introduction to the series, and it follows Buffy Summers and her mother Joyce Summers moving to a new town, which is Sunnydale, California. Lots to talk about there, but they're moving from Los Angeles, California, from Emory High School. That's like the only connection to the film from 1992. We can discuss that, later. It's not really considered canon, but just for those of you that were wondering, that's one of the tying threads. So Buffy and Joyce had to move because Buffy burnt down the gym of her old high school. And as the episode progresses, we learn that it's because Buffy is known as the Slayer. So one girl chosen in all the world to, conquer and fight the forces of darkness and the vampires. And so throughout the episode, it's set in high school. They're sophomores in high school. So for those of you that don't really know what a sophomore is, you're 10. So, 16 years old around. It is mid-year, so keeping that in mind as you're watching, because if you think, oh, it's the start of the school year, why are they talking about homework? And it's like, no, it's just like how this season was mid-season. They're starting mid-school year. And yeah, it's just following Buffy meeting people at the new school. She meets the people who become her two best friends, Xander and Willow, who are nerdy outcasts at Sunnydale High School. We also meet the Queen Bee, Cordelia, very suiting name. And we meet Giles, Rupert Giles, known as Buffy's Watcher. And there's a great scene that we will discuss where Buffy first enters the library and he has no tact whatsoever.
So
Is like
chill. So chill
waiting
from
for you,
Giles.
basically. And yeah, so we just see Buffy struggling to fit in because, the situation is hard. But at the same time, she has this big secret that she's trying to hide and escape from her past in Los Angeles and being the Slayer. And yet it's coming to haunt her. We also see some vampire activity in Welcome to the Hellmouth, especially at the end, but I will kind of let Alex pick up from there in the Harvest and kind of take those components of Welcome to the Hellmouth and put them, I think it's easier to do it that way for discussing the Harvest. That's Welcome to the Hellmouth. We'll discuss why it's called that when we get more into the nitty-gritty. Did I miss anything super important?
Well, I think we've got some good, solid background on who the characters are, how they relate to each other, and how Welcome to the Hellmouth generally sets up both Buffy as a series and what happens in The Harvest, because The Harvest is a little bit more plot-centric, I suppose.
Yeah, and it has, the scenes where Giles is actually describing the cosmology or the
Yes.
mythos of Buffy, and we get to just kind of see more what it means to be a Slayer. So, Alex, I will
Yes.
hand it over to you.
Fantastic. So, the vampires who are introduced in Welcome to the Hellmouth, there is Darla, who is a blonde young woman. It's one of those complicated 90s situations where the actress is clearly in her mid-20s, but is perhaps playing a 16-year-old. Who knows?
Darla is portrayed by Julie Benz, who I think is absolutely stunning and
Yes.
gorgeous. So
And
it's
has
also
love.
that's distracting because she's so pretty. And then you're like, what age are you?
Yeah, and her voice is lovely as well. She has this really honey gravel, subtle southern voice, which is just lovely to listen to. But yes, so we know that she is a vampire from the opening of Welcome to the Hellmouth, which I want to discuss in a little
Yes,
bit. So I'll
absolutely.
leave that aside. We also have Luke, who is a big, hulking, possibly mid-30s looking vampire fella. very deep voice, great presence, a lot of gravitas in Luke. And then
Yeah.
also the Master. So the Master is kind of, you can see his Nosferatu, Salem's Lot lineage. He's very tall, not as tall as Luke, but quite tall, thin, bald, permanently vamp face. So that's something to point out as well, is that vampires have two ways of looking. They can look like normal human beings who they were in life, and then when the demon face, their vamp face pops out, they get all ridges on their like foreheads
Yeah,
and yellow
all
eyes.
bumpy
They
as
go
well.
bumpy, yeah, and fangs as well. So the
Yes.
master seems to be permanently in a state of bumpy face. He is
Extremely bumpy face, like bat-like bumpy face.
exactly. So it is really strange and disconcerting and creepy to see him. He is trapped in a church that has fallen underground. You find out in the episode that there was an earthquake that pulled him and his church into the subterranean space. He is now trapped. And so the harvest is about him trying to get enough mystical energy to break out of this trap. So he turns Luke into his vessel, and so everything that Luke eats, feeds on, kills, mostly teenagers, obviously, goes into the master and empowers him to potentially break free. So we have Buffy going on a rescue mission because Xander and Willow's other friend, Jessie, has been kidnapped by the vampires and taken into this underground lair. Buffy has to go and find him. We also meet Angel, who likes to give Buffy cryptic messages. Hello, Cora. Sorry, that is the cat again. She obviously cares very strongly about Angel. So, yes, Angel pops up, gives cryptic messages, helps Buffy, sort of. Mostly just stands around looking brooding and handsome, setting up future seasons.
He does give her the sterling silver cross necklace that saves her
Yes,
at the end of Welcome to the Hellmouth when
yes,
Luke attacks her.
indeed. Big, chunky cross. Uh, so, yes, so Buffy goes into this underground lair. Xander has sneaked away to join her because he's feeling a bit emasculated. He helps rescue. Sorry, listeners didn't see Megan's little face there. I'm looking forward to discussing Xander with her based on that. Yes, so they rescue Jessie, but discover too late that Jessie has been turned into a vampire and they barely escape with their lives. Then the actual attempted massacre occurs in the one and only nightclub, The Bronze, where Buffy, Giles, Willow, and Xander all go. Buffy fights Luke and defeats him. Willow, Giles, and Xander help all the normal people escape, and the Master's grand plan is thwarted. But right at the end, Giles reveals, oh, it's not over. He's not, the Master's still there. Ooh, beware. And then the teenagers wisecrack away into the distance, and Giles looks very tired and very old in a way that I can relate to more now than I could have. Is that
Yeah,
about everything?
yeah. I mean, we will kind of cover some other bases as we go, but in regards to a summary, yes, I think that's great. And yeah, I have lots of thoughts and feelings, especially in watching this, rewatching these episodes for the first time in years, quite literally, not looking for things for my research. So
Mm.
really just enjoying it. But also, I watched it with my boyfriend and our housemate, and neither of them have ever really like watched Buffy religiously. My boyfriend's never seen it. And then our housemate Carl, he watched it a bit in the late 2000s with his quote unquote first girlfriend when they were in middle school because her family was a Buffy family and obsessed, but he remembers absolutely none of it. So it was a lot of fun. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Alex. When you watch something that you know really well and that you love, and then you watch it with someone who's watching it for the first time, and just that kind of the things you notice or maybe cringe at that you didn't before because you were in the safety of yourself. Whereas
Mm.
now there's another person and you're feeding off their receptions and like what they are and are not laughing at or reacting to.
So, out of curiosity, then, what did you cringe at that you didn't expect to cringe at?
Just some of the Xanderisms, and we'll get to it, the very nice California language that thankfully starts to fizzle away after these first two episodes. Like in the locker room, I will read some of those lines, I think, because they are so fucking absurd. Never anyone ever, I think. So, yeah, just little things like that. So, yeah, those are our summaries. I have been kind of like bombarding Alex because my brain is doing anything to not work on marking or my thesis corrections. So I'm just constantly like, what can we do for the podcast? And I thought, oh, it'd be fun for us to do, quote of the week. So a quote that we talked about this in our, intro first pilot episode, I guess, as you will. And we did quotes from like literature that inspired us. But for this, it's a quote that stood out or stuck with us for whatever reason. It's either really important, it's really funny, it's iconic, whatever it is. And I set a task for myself, Alex. I was like, I'm going to do my absolute best to not do the iconic quotes on this.
Okay.
I think there will be moments where you just have to,
I
like out
mean,
for a walk, bitch. But that's a me thing. You do whatever you want.
I think there's going to have to be a balance between the intrinsic iconic nature of Buffy, because it has some of the best one-liners and catchphrases and slang that just became part of my life. But then there are also like, so we watch it as nerds, but then we also watch it as academics. We have to acknowledge that sometimes there is a line that teases that kind of, what were they thinking here? What does this mean for the cosmology of Buffy?
Yeah.
What is that tying into? So my quote, I mean, sometimes it will be iconic because I am who I am. But my quote today, for example, is a little bit more, oh, now that's interesting. And what does that
Yeah.
mean?
Go
So,
for it.
okay, so my quote is actually there's a couple that kind of tie together. The
Okay.
first one is I think they're both Luke. And the first one is the sleeper will wake and the world will bleed. Amen. And there's that big moment and he's getting ready to summon the master from this big pool of blood. And then towards
Mhm.
the end of the Welcome to the Harvest, there's the earth will belong to the old ones and hell itself will come to town. Amen. And it was this repetition of amen that really kind of stood out to me. For people who are new to Buffy, within the Buffy universe, Christianity does work against vampires.
Mhm.
Now, as a Gothic scholar, I have to acknowledge that Christianity working against vampires started with Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like that made it the most popular, the whole holding up a crucifix, a holy wafer kind of situation.
In literature and
In
like pop culture, not so much in historic belief. But yeah.
into the kind of general public's mentality was Dracula. Um,
Hmm.
But in Dracula in particular, it was always Catholicism that was the
Hmm.
most useful. I can't think of a situation in Dracula off the top of my head where a Church of England cross was useful, but crucifixes from Catholicism always useful. So for those people who might not be familiar with the distinction, if the cross shape has the body of Jesus on it, it is a crucifix and it tends to be Catholic because they prioritize Jesus's sacrifice as a major point of their faith. Crosses without the body of Jesus on are Protestant, Methodist, Church of England, all those other flavors of Christianity, because
Hmm.
they focus on different things depending on the aspect of faith that they prioritize. Buffy just kind of goes all crosses, all Christianity works on vampires, whilst also not necessarily occupying a Christian universe. So there's no, like, they talk about the old ones, and there's a bit where Giles talks about when demons walked the earth and all of this sort of business, which I'm very much looking forward to talking to you about. But then we have Luke saying amen over and over and over again. And I loved that kind of subversion of Christian faith that he was obviously picking up on. The master is trapped in a subterranean church, but the
Hmm.
church itself is an effective force against the master.
In like a weeble wobble bubble.
Yeah, yeah, there's this kind of force field that
Like
he can't get his
special
hands
effects.
through.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just put me in mind of how in medieval understandings, late medieval, admittedly, of what the ultimate in unholy, in sinister, in vile supernaturalness is the inverted Christian, at the medieval era, Catholic ritual. So,
Hmm.
witchcraft, for example, often mimics the Catholic service, but where there's God, there's Satan now, where there are priests, there are witches, where there's the body of Christ and the blood of Christ and the wine and the bread, there's babies in witch Sabbaths, like in the medieval era, there's literal flesh and blood. So it just made me think were the creators kind of inadvertently engaging with that subversion, that inversion of Christianity? Or were they just trying to make it obvious that Luke is an acolyte of the Master?
Yeah, I mean, I have obviously so many thoughts. Alex read my thesis, so she's aware of that. The unification scene where the Master and Luke share blood and Luke becomes the vessel. I have notes on that, and I also have notes on the amen aspect and everything. So yeah, hopefully I can kind of also tag team with that and go with that. But I'll share my quote really quickly. It is very far out there. And for some reason, I don't know why, it's such a throwaway aside quote, but because as I'm becoming more and more involved in the history of medicine and medical thought, I thought, okay, I'll do this. And if I notice scenes that talk about medicine or something in that vein a bit more, I'll kind of discuss that. So this is in Welcome to the Hellmouth, and it's one of the first scenes we kind of see in the bronze. And it's Cordelia, and she's talking about like pop medical diagnoses and everything. And so this is the quote. My mom doesn't even get out of bed anymore. And the doctor says it's Epstein-Barr. I'm like, please. It's chronic hepatitis, or at least chronic fatigue syndrome. I mean, nobody cool has Epstein-Barr anymore. And then they just move away from her. But, that was like a quote. And I think that it's just showing the world that Cordelia lives in and everything, but also like chronic hepatitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and just like all of that. And so Epstein-Barr, for those of you that don't know, is a virus, Epstein-Barr virus, and it is one of 9 known human herpes virus types. So it's in the family of herpes, and it's one of the most common viruses to humans. So a form of Epstein-Barr that we know of is mononucleosis. So the kissing disease or kissing sickness that I don't know about you, Alex, but in years like 7, 8, just wiped out so many of my classmates. So it's when you're really tired and have this long cold, and it's shared through sharing bodily fluids, so saliva, usually at that age. So we were told to not share, water bottles and things, but also at that age, you're starting to experiment with like kissing your crush and things like that. And so I thought that was quite funny. There's this like crazy statistic where something like 90, so people over the age of 5 and adults, 90% of people show antibodies or evidence of a previous infection. So the way that it manifests isn't always symptomatic. And infants become susceptible as soon as their maternal antibody protection disappears. Antibodies, for those of you that haven't seen Osmosis Jones or don't know, it's, the little fighters in your body, your white blood cells that go, that's not us, that's bad. And they go out and they battle the not self aspect. And so I just thought that was like really funny and interesting that it's like Epstein-Barr is so blasé at this time because this is also the era of, fad diets, like Atkins diets and everything. And like, oh, you can't be diagnosed with that. Like, no one's diagnosed with that anymore. And it's kind of like you can't control diseases in that way. And also, I think it kind of speaks to our current moment. And because I've been teaching the history of madness since the 20th century this term. The more modern we got, the more discussions there were in regards to the increase or proliferation of neurodivergent diagnoses, right? So ADHD, autism, OCD. And so I just thought it was this kind of funny little time capsule, but also something that like still speaks to our moment in a way. And I just, again, the absurdity of it and like, why is that in the series as a whole, right?
So here I am, a fellow academic. Close read it. Tell me, why is that in Buffy? I think it's really interesting that it's like this oral infection that can be passed around. Is it blood carried? Like, close read it. Tell me more.
So I think one of the reasons when I kind of decided to look into it is the fact that it's a virus. And there's increasing readings in Gothic studies and horror studies of vampirism as virus-like, as a type of infection that then mutates. So viruses, what they do is they invade the body and then they invade individual cells, right? Which is what we're made of. And they reproduce their DNA within that cell. So that's how they multiply, and that's when you become a quote unquote host. So, kind of thinking about that alongside, vampirism and vampirology, are vampires like a virus-like infestation of the body, or is it something else? I think it's something else. When we get to the Giles discussion, we can dive into that a bit more. But there is like a little bit of that. And if it's the kissing disease, then vampires, quote unquote, kiss their victims. Usually it's on the neck, right?
Mhm.
At the crook of the neck where the jugular vein resides. It's not exclusive to that. They can kind of bite you and feed on you anywhere, but that's the iconic.
Again, fun fact, that was begun by Bram Stoker in Dracula, the whole neck bite situation. It used to be they'd chomp on you wherever they could get to the blood, basically, whereas
Yes.
Bram Stoker introduced this heavily eroticized neck location situation, and that just kind of became the default bite setting for vampires.
Yes, exactly. And like we'll see that throughout Buffy and we'll kind of call it out and everything. But I don't know if this was intentional, like this overlap or anything. And there is always the trap I've heard on other podcasts like Buffering the Vampire Slayer and, Reddit threads that if you read into everything deeply, it can all start to make sense in some capacity. But I think with this, it is an interesting, synchronicity or correlation, if not intentional. And I think that that's something that is also a theme throughout the series, as you were saying, Alex, is how aware of so when we say Christianity in this podcast, we're meaning Catholicism for the most part in broad strokes, as you were saying, Alex, because of the superstition and the ritual and the imagery and iconography and language of Catholicism and how just rooted in Western culture that is.
Now, it's worth noting at this point as well that our discussion of Catholicism will be informed by a Renaissance PR campaign of the medieval. So there is a kind of understanding within Gothic literature in particular that the medieval era, and especially Catholicism within the medieval era, dark, superstitious, morbid, creepy, wrong, because in Britain in particular, after the Reformation, Henry VIII needed a divorce, divided the church. I'm giving you the ultimate in potted history here, please bear with me. So the church became riven. We got the Church of England / Protestantism and whatnot after Henry VIII, prior to Henry VIII, Catholicism. And there was this sudden need to make Catholicism look as wrong as possible to shore up power in the Renaissance and in the Enlightenment. And then Gothic literature started picking up on the tail end of that by making its fiction spooky, by making it Catholic, because there were a couple of hundred years of this history of Catholic, scary, Protestant Church of England, correct, civilized, dignified Christianity. So I introduce this because while we will talk about superstition and darkness and creepiness, we are nodding to that Gothic tradition of Catholicism, and we don't want to impugn any of our listeners who might be Catholic. We are talking about the heritage within literature and horror. We're not necessarily having a literal religious discussion at this stage.
Yeah, and then when I discuss any kind of medieval religion, at that time, Christianity was synonymous to what we now call Catholicism. There was no
No
difference
separation.
because it was pre Reformation, unless you're talking about Eastern Orthodox, but that split was in the ninth century, 8th, 10th century. So that's been around and different. So yeah, when I am talking about medieval Christianity, just think of Catholic, Pope, and
Yeah,
everything like that. And if there's any differences, I will then we'll,
yeah.
break
We'll
that down.
to
Yeah,
signpost you as we go, listeners.
we'll
We're
do our best. Yeah, and
complicated.
please let us know as you listen if we make something unclear or you wish that we would kind of unpack something further, like we're used to constructive criticism and we do encourage it. So, yeah, that was my quote. Again, a very far out one, but it just really stood out to me this time. I don't, like I don't know why. I mean, there were others that were funnier. I have the Luke sermons, as I call them, but I decided to go with Cordelia on this one.
I love it because I interpret that line like I love now the inflection you've given it. Whenever I hear it, I basically just think, oh, Cordelia's mum is depressed. She can't get
Oh, yeah,
out
yeah.
because she has depression. And Cordelia is just so removed from reality. She's like, no, it has to be some chic illness.
Yeah, well, just like when she was saying, "Oh, when I go shopping, I don't have to have it because it's the most ex because of
because
how much
it's
it costs.
expensive.
I have
Because
to
it
have it because
costs
it's the
more.
most expensive." And you're like, are the two exclusive? I don't get it.
Yeah.
But that's the
Where's
point,
the
is like it's Cordelia logic.
yeah.
And as we'll see, and again, these are the first two episodes, characters are still kind of finding their strides. Cordelia does get grounded a little bit more. She's still within her universe, but there's a bit of
This development.
so do we want to do our kind of like scene stealer character of the week now or at the end after we discuss the episodes?
I mean, my scene stealer is a throwaway fun stealer. It's not necessarily going to be something we can unpack.
Okay.
It's up to you. I think it might be a cute way to end the episode.
Okay, so we'll do that at the end. Okay, well then let's kind of go generally scene by scene, just like what our notes are and how we get going. So let's start with the cold open of the entire series.
Yes, I think it is magnificent. Like, I think as again, I have to acknowledge Joss Whedon knows what he's doing when he writes. Problematic and hateful as the alleged and whatnot accusations are, he knows what he's doing. So we have a kind of typical horror moment where we have two people outside the school breaking into the school, and we
Into
have
the science lab, which is
science
got like
lab.
a human skull in it and stuff. On this one, I was like, what fucking school has all that dark shit on the science in the science lab? But it's definitely leaning into that visual language
Yes,
of this is spooky, blah blah blah. Sorry,
yes.
continue on. I had to
But also an interesting juxtaposition of science with supernatural from the
yes.
get-go as well.
And like Victorian science, like that
Uh,
anthropology, and then like
yeah.
science, which we get later in the series.
So we have a scene which cold watching leads you to feel a particular way. So you have a young man who is, he says he used to go to the school. So he is at least older than 18, which
Or
means,
got kicked out.
sorry?
Or he got kicked out.
Or he got kicked out. I always
Probably
interpreted it.
older,
He
but
looks older because he's got the way he's dressed isn't quite teen. It's still a young man.
yeah.
Again, there's that kind of distortion because he's clearly in his mid to late 20s. He could be playing anything from 15 to 30. But I always assumed kind of college dropout sort of
Yeah.
age.
No fair.
Yeah. So he smashes the window, and there's a girl behind him who's blonde, and she's in a little blue sweater and a white shirt and a tartan skirt. White,
Schoolgirl.
real Catholic schoolgirl in Mary colors as well, which I find really interesting, the whole Virgin Mary blue and white aesthetic. So he cracks open the window and he says to her, come on, it's fine. They climb through. And she's really shy and anxious and like, no, we're going to get into trouble. And he's like, it's fine. There's a great view from the roof. It's going to be lovely. Obviously, normally, he is the predator.
Hmm.
He's the predatory one. He's going to take advantage of this poor, innocent girl. She is completely alone in this huge building. And in a normal world situation, this would be a cause for concern.
Hmm.
She goes, are you sure there's no one here? And he goes, no, we're completely alone. She turns away and goes, good. And when she turns back, vampire, vamp face attacks.
Yeah,
And
with
just like, go
let's
on.
just say with the lion sounds, which they do over the vampires to show that they're not human.
Exactly. So the vampires have this snarling roar that they do when they attack. And so instantly the whole concept of predation and danger and who can be dangerous gets flipped. Because of course we're going to have Buffy later, who is
Hmm.
this sweet candy floss teenage girl, blonde, hazel eyes, petite, and she is going to be a superhero. So we have this kind of inversion of where danger can originate from and also what vampirism can do to ordinary people. I think
Yeah.
genius open.
And then from that, cold open subversion that's also playing a lot on like the visual language of 80s, 90s horror films, like The
Yes.
Faculty or I think that's actually early 2000, but the similar kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And then jump cut into Nerf Herder's phenomenal theme song for Buffy. It's fantastic. And then again after that, it cuts to Buffy in bed, tossing and turning in her like white linen silk sheets and having dreams of blood and the master and
And also little snippets of future episodes. I thought it
yeah.
was really interesting how you have, like, I used to, when I was a kid, the first episode, the first montage of the theme song was peak excitement because you'd get these little snippets of what was going to happen and what is
Mhm.
that snake figure? What's happening here? And so I feel like having that mirrored again in the dream sequence is a really interesting choice because with the theme, everything's really fun and kick ass.
Mhm.
And then in the dream, you have a teenage girl who you haven't gotten to know yet, who's frightened. And there's all these images, like you say, of blood and death and violence. And it's that kind of mirroring of Darla of a little worried to begin with.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if it hadn't been clear already, it's underlining just how fundamental and crucial blood is to the series in a way that often gets overlooked. And so that's something I'll be discussing a lot because that was my thesis was people haven't looked at blood in Buffy. They just kind of go, "Oh, it's a yeah, vampires," or yeah, you know, violence. And it's like, "No, but look, what is that saying and doing?" So, dear listeners, get ready for that. And yeah, and then we get a cut to, super sunny Sunnydale High opening high school. Everyone's going in, Torrance High School. So you'll recognize it from, I believe it's Beverly Hills 90210. It's the same high school, iconic. And this one we're introduced to Xander, who's skateboarding chaotically down the road.
The one
We,
and only time he ever, ever
yeah,
skateboards.
we meet Willow for the first time. They see Buffy and they're like, oh, new girl kind of thing. And we are just kind of going beat by beat because we're conscientious of time. But one thing that I love in this first episode, it didn't make it to my thesis because I didn't know how to work it. But one of the first class we see Buffy in ever is a history course. And they're discussing none other than the Black Death, and the teacher's writing Black Death and on the chalkboard, and she asks really funny questions that are like way too serious for 16-year-olds, like, oh, the Black Death was the first form of germ warfare. And I was like, they didn't know about germs, and how is it germ? I mean, kind of, I guess, but just the fact that they're talking about mass death, this everyone has heard of the Black Death in some capacity, but mass period of death and terror, and that's like just in the background of the school classroom, like that's what Buffy's coming in on.
Yes, because it's worth noting that the Black Death was a medieval plague as well. For those of us who are a little fuzzy on dates, like a lot of like European history, I found out while doing my PhD and going, oh, really? Oh, I should have known this sooner. And the Black Plague is something similar. So it just absolutely decimated, more than decimated, the continent of Europe and
Mhm.
technically kind of led to capitalism as well. Sorry about
Yeah.
that. But it is also worth noting the vampire heritage of the rat and the rat plague.
Mhm.
So Nosferatu, the original film from, I want to say, was it 1933, the original Nosferatu, something like that?
That's a little late. Let's see.
It's late, isn't it? It's the 20s.
1922.
I was 10 years in the future. So, Nosferatu, 1922, infamous scene. So, Nosferatu has a vampire figure, bald head, pointy ears, pointy fingers, little rodenty fangs. And when he moves into a town, he brings a literal plague of rats with him. Even in discussing the Black Plague, we're having this kind of nod to the medieval inheritance, and we're also having a nod to the vampiric inheritance of Buffy as well.
Yeah, and the concept of contagion, which
Yes,
also, can link back to the Epstein Barr
yes.
quote earlier. So, yeah, the Black Death or the bubonic plague, swept through Europe 1346 to 1353. Iconic years 1348. That is like the kind of year that a lot of people know. but it continued throughout history. I mean, the plague manifested itself up through the Renaissance and Tudor era and everything. But yeah, so this just kind of very nondescript detail is actually really, really like that was a very deliberate choice. And I think that it's fun and worth pointing out. But yeah, so we have all of that. This is when Cordelia and Buffy are kind of quote unquote bonding. Cordelia shares her book and is like, yeah, Sunnydale's a really small town. She's like, good part of town is a half a block from the bad part. Not a whole lot of town here. And so that'll be important to kind of realize as the series progresses because I mean, actually, for a variety of reasons, but Buffy's meant to be the kind of somewhere that's no everywhere and nowhere at the same time, ubiquitous, small town, but also very, very much Californian. But it has the cute little main street, and then as we learn as the series goes on, disproportionate amount of cemeteries and graveyards for
Yeah.
a small town.
And locations as well, like just the
Yeah.
geography. Like I remember there's a scene
Yeah.
in one of these episodes, I think it's in The Harvest, where Buffy is trying to skip school and the headmaster goes, no, no, shan't do that, and literally locks her in, which as a grown-up, I'm like, that's a fire hazard. We don't
Yeah.
lock children in. But in the background, you can see that there's a river behind them. Like
Oh,
there's
there's
some kind of horizon because it's not the sea because it
mm-mm.
has another horizon above it of a cityscape and I'm like, where's this river?
Yeah, no, I mean, and we'll talk about this as we go, but Sunnydale is located next to vineyards, mountains, the desert, a river slash unknown dam, forests,
A dock.
University of California campus, docks, the beach. Like it's kind of whatever works for the series is where it's located. And I think that part of that is can get away with it because of the Hellmouth and Hellmouth metaphysics. So I guess with that, Hellmouth.
Hellmouth.
What is it, Alex?
Oh, okay. I love the concept of a hellmouth. So my research looks at the influence of medieval culture on Gothic literature. And one of the ways that medieval culture infiltrated Gothic literature most heavily was through things like Dante's Inferno and stuff like that. So the hellmouth pops up a lot. And so Buffy's interpretation of it is really exciting for me. So in broad terms, in Buffy, the Hellmouth is this thinning mystical spot where some sinister other side presses close against the real world. And it's a point of liminality, easily punctured, stuff comes through, stuff goes away. And also, I think at one point, Giles calls it a center of mystical energy and that the supernatural gravitates towards it. So it literally pulls things, uncanny, creepy, terrible things to this site of mystical convergence. Now, in medieval literature, the Hellmouth is something slightly different. It's often related to anyone who has done Greek myth or classical literature or anything like that might recognize this from things like Orpheus and Eurydice, where he goes through a crevasse and enters the underworld. That kind of inflects it a little bit. But the Hellmouth is literally a doorway into hell by the time the medieval period comes around. So it's often known as the Civitas Diaboli on the other side as well. Hell is pictured as a city, which I'll be bringing up again in future episodes, just as a heads up there. But the idea is in things like medieval texts like Piers Plowman, they bring up the fact that in Catholic apocryphal storytelling that was big in the medieval era. Prior to Jesus, everyone who lived and died on earth went to hell because there was nowhere else for them to go. There was no way for them to be saved and for them to go to heaven because the only way to be saved is to believe in Jesus. This causes a bit of a problem. So they create a narrative called the harrowing of hell, where Jesus, in the 3 days that he is dead, goes into hell via a hellmouth, rescues the good folks who shouldn't technically be in hell. So that's Adam, a few apostles, things like that, scoops them out, takes them to heaven.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be pulling up on like Harrowing of Hells. Like, I think that's going to be, I introduce it here because I think it's something we're going to be talking about a lot going forwards. So,
Yes.
in medieval iconography as well, the Hellmouth is often represented as a literal beast's mouth, indeterminate beast, sort of leonine. It's got teeth, it's got snarling lips, it's got googly eyes, it's got people leaving it like it's a tunnel. And
Mhm.
anyone who's seen the Candyman might recognize that kind of visual in the graffiti that Helen kind of like when she steps through a hole in the wall, they've drawn a hell mouth around the hole in the wall, and they pick up on that in the modern Candyman.
Yes. Um, yeah, no, great, well done. And I'll bring in the medieval components of the Hellmouth as we move forwards, because there are other bits that we haven't touched upon, but we don't want to do it all at once.
Do it all in the one.
But so for Buffy, as you said, the Hellmouth is this point of mystical convergence, and it's a bit unclear of where the Hellmouth is and what precisely the Hellmouth is. And that also changes throughout the series. Like is it above, below, underneath? Adams in his book Slayer Slaying has a definition for the Hellmouth that he is great, and we'll have links to that in the show notes. But trying to kind of go the way that they talk about it is it's everywhere, but also depicted as like, is it a geographic space? Is it, a landscape? Is it more than that? But the important thing for us is that it is this, as you said, Alex, kind of a gateway. It's this liminal, mystical space that is a magnet. It's drawing supernatural forces and paranormal forces. So vampires, demons, and other forces of darkness. And so that's what's important for the time being. Also, the fact that the Spanish settlers, when they first moved and settled in the Sunnydale area, called it the Boca del Infierno, which is literally Hellmouth. But Boca del Infierno kind of comes up throughout the series a few times and does become important in later seasons. So, yeah, that's why Buffy, as Giles says, there's a reason why you're here and now. Crucial mystical upheaval. So things are starting to stir because the master's about to awake and the harvest is nigh. And we get this really, I admire it, but it's kind of goofy now. The cut to it's like the front of Sunnydale High, and then it goes to a bush. Then this weird black fade, and then it's like, ooh, we're underground. And it's like, and it's, panning down the church that the master is trapped in. That's a very gothicized, ruined church from the 1937 earthquake, but also like it's this huge ornate set, and it's so funny in the series. The vampires are using candles, even though if they catch fire, they die. But it's candles and gold lighting and religious iconography everywhere. It's great. But yeah, so it's giving the impression that this church that was once there is beneath Sunnydale High,
Yes.
underneath the ground in this one of the vampires is walking through this big circular pipe, so attached to the sewers, which they talk about, I think, in The Harvest, of how the
Yeah.
vampires get around,
It's
but it's not
it's
quite clear.
yeah, it's a very nebulous underground location. They can access it through the graveyard, but Xander acknowledges that there's an electrical tunnel that runs the length of Sunnydale, and Buffy's like vampires like sewers. And so it's literally like the writers have just gone, underground network.
Yeah,
They can
I
walk
mean,
places. And
fine. I'm not gonna nitpick that.
like they're just like, we need it, we'll have it. And there's this great, you talked about goofy cuts. One of my favorite goofy cuts is when you have Xander and Buffy underground in the sewers walking through, and then the camera pans so that it disappears into the wall that they are
Yeah,
walking next to. And then the wall kind of slides across the screen and becomes the front of the card catalog in the library. And then you
yeah.
enter, the view enters the library, and you start looking at Giles and Willow doing their research. And it's such, it really knocks you out of the show, but it's so endearing.
It's very much like 70s detective film in a sense, or kind of like it's quite cinematic again because the first two episodes they're really trying to attract an audience, so they're doing things to try to make it, you know, television, like engrossing television. So yeah, those kind of things are I mean, I love that cut. I think it's fun.
It,
In this scene, in the underground church, we have I love it. I love it so much. All these vampires are around, and Luke is kind of muttering and mumbling in front of this. It's clearly a pool of water, but it's meant to be a pool of blood. And it's at the spot that is quote unquote meant to be where the altar is, according to the script notes. You don't really know that in the show. It's implied, but it's kind of you're just like, oh, it's just in a church. But it that's literally meant to be like that's in the script. And Luke is talking, and then he's like, "Amen." And just a quick aside, Luke is played by Brian Thompson. So for those of you that love your cult films and television shows, he is the bounty hunter in X-Files. So yeah, it's the
He's
same person.
also he's also one of the goons. Like me and my husband rewatched The Terminator recently,
Yeah,
and he's one of them at the beginning where it's like, "I need your clothes."
such a deep voice and a very distinct face.
Such a like it's fantastic.
Yeah. And so then, it's like heavy organ music, very Bach organ. And then the master rises from this bubbling pool of blood in, you gotta love 1997 special effects. And Metcalf, Mark Metcalf as the master. Every time I watch it, my appreciation and love for him as the master grows because he is so melodramatic and goofy and I love watching his hands because they're always just really awkward and like very straight because he has prosthetic nails on. But as he rises and it's just so clean, he's not wet, and he comes out and it's this intense moment. He's in, SS uniform style clothes, so
Yeah,
really leaning into the villain and the
it's
all
sort of
that.
pseudo-Catholic cassock as well, because it has that kind of high collar, which is kind of Mandarin collar, which was very
Yeah,
popular in the 90s because Orientalism and cultural appropriation. Again, we're going to acknowledge them when they pop up, but it also is very close to that kind of Catholic priest collar, that height,
yeah,
and then these kind of very architectural shoulders. But again, you're right, there's the SS, and then it all just drops down and creates this illusion of great height and spindliness.
yeah. I mean, he is very tall and long
Mm.
and lean, but
As soon
it's
as you put him next to Luke, though, it's like frail, tiny,
But
bitty.
it's just such a fun, dramatic scene that is goofy, but gotta love it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, we've met our villain in a sense, right? We've seen him. We don't know what's going on quite yet. And then we get Buffy, you know, her whole scene in the bedroom, getting ready to go to the bronze, some problematic language about clothes that she's looking for and things.
Why does she have those clothes?
I think that
Why?
it's just they were thinking more about the lines rather than why she would have those things.
They should, right. So if people aren't familiar, it's literally Buffy in front of a mirror and she holds up this like squeaky black vinyl looking,
Bondage, Betty
yes,
Page,
got
like,
D rings
oh, yeah.
and she's like, what is her line there?
She's like, "Hi, I'm Buffy, and I'm a mega slut or something."
And that's it. I'm a huge slut. And then she holds up this kind of chiffon ditzy floral blue thing, which is hideous, in front of her and goes, "Hi, would you like my copy of The Watchtower?" And then she goes, "Ugh," and just kind of crumbles. Incidentally, I had no idea what The Watchtower was for most of my watching of Buffy until I
Uh-huh.
was like in my 20s, and I suddenly found out The Watchtower is the newsletter or something of Mormons. And I was like, oh, that's what she's referencing there.
Buffy has a lot of quips or pop culture references, what's known as Slayer slang.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few times where you're like, how do you know that? It's very clearly just Whedon or the writers being like, this is quippy and funny. And
Yeah,
it's like,
30-year-old knows this.
year-old knows that, like, and then Joyce walks in and she's like, how are you? Da da da. Gotta love Joyce. I'm Team Joyce. Some people really don't like Joyce, and she does things I don't agree with, but as a whole, she tries.
This is going to be fun because when I watched Buffy as a teen, Joyce was just kind of the mum you resist. She just doesn't get it. But of course, she doesn't get it. She's not given all the information. Joyce, just teenage struggle. And I watched it in my 20s and I hate Joyce. I hate Joyce. She fails constantly as a mother, and I'm ready to argue about it. Let's go.
Okay. But I mean, so kind of speaking of finding as a mother, the thing that's always stood out to me is, she's like, "Oh, how was your day?" And Buffy's like, "Oh, I'm going to a club." And no, it's a non-club mom. But Joyce is like, "Okay, have fun," basically. And it's like, who are you going with? Where is it? We don't have cell phones. Like,
Why are you 16 and going to a club?
yeah, I mean, the bronze is, I was explaining to the boys, like, how funny the bronze is because it is a setting and, a beloved kind of character all the way through till the end to season
Yeah,
7.
love the bronze.
And the bronze is the high school hangout. It becomes the college age hangout. It serves soft drinks and muffins and coffee, but also alcohol.
Yeah,
It the cameos of the bands, those have to be like
yeah,
side bite-size episodes or
yes.
something because the not quotes, the lyrics of the music in these two episodes by Sprung Monkey are so on point. It's shocking.
Music again, it's perfection.
I do
But yes,
listen to the
but
soundtrack
so
or
good.
whatever because it's
Yeah.
been. I love 90s music.
But
Tremendous.
yes, there's a moment where in The Harvest where people are going into the bronze. And even though, like Xander has said, there's no cover charge on a Friday,
Cordelia said it. Yeah.
something like that, people show the security guard their ID. And I'm like, 16-year-olds are in here. Who are you showing your ID to? Shouldn't that be the barman? What is going on?
Well, there's like also when they say there's no cover tonight, and those people are paying the bouncer because it's the same scene from
Yeah.
Welcome to Hellmouth. They recycled it. And then behind written Sharpie is like, no one under the age of 21 will be served alcohol. It's just like very goofy and funny.
I always thought like the bronze was kind of like Central Park from Friends after dark with a bar and a band. So it was somewhere because you'll see the teenagers occasionally go and just sit and drink cappuccinos on the couch. And it's usually when, Willow's looking all awkward and wanting to take part, but not really wanting to, or Dee and Buffy do revision in the bronze in later seasons where they just had their homework on this tiny table with a little lamp
Yeah.
on it. It's like,
It's got a pool
is this
table,
place?
like, but the Central Park After Dark is a good. It's a bit weirder than that, but like that's a
Yeah.
good kind of
It's-
nutshell sort of
yeah.
thing.
But
But yes,
also moment of silence for the bouncer, who I think is the one and only black man in Sunnydale, and he dies pretty much instantly until like season 2 or 3.
yeah, Paul, exactly. I think we have one or two, but I might be thinking of season 2. But yeah, that's definitely something we'll be talking about. But before Buffy gets to the bronze, she's followed by a mysterious person
Ooh, who could
who
it
she
be?
they have this another goofy, lovely scene where she's in the dark, one of the many back alleys in Sunnydale, even though it's a tiny town and it makes no sense. And she's doing a gymnast, like her arms, she's
Like a
standing straight up
handstand.
off the pole, and then does a woof, woof, and like spins around and lands behind him, and he turns.
Well, no, she kicks him. She kicks him
No,
in the
and then it's like friend or foe. And this is our introduction to Angel.
angel, who both actor and character is in his late 20s.
Yes, portrayed by a young David Boreanaz.
Yes, late 20s. Buffy 16. Again, I saw no issues with this as a teenager. I was like, no, this is perfectly fine. Why is this a problem? I know what it's like to be a teenager. I'm smart. I'm intelligent. I'm
Yeah.
grown for my age. And now as like a mid-30s woman, I'm like, child, run.
And they have this conversation that's very cryptic and tense and trying to be like smirky and quippy and stuff. And at the end, he tosses a velvet box at her, and it has the cross in it. He's
It's
like, for protection or whatever. And it's,
huge. It's blocky. It is not Buffy style, but it is very effective.
yeah. Ooh, we should do like cross watch because she wears
Yeah.
some gorgeous crucifixes and crosses
Um,
and necklaces and styles throughout. So this is cross watch one. This is the iconic Buffy cross, and unfortunately, it is not the nicest looking of
It
cross.
is not pretty. But the thing is, I can forgive it because I'm thinking surely the most effective cross is the biggest cross you can fit around your neck.
That's made from silver and is just huge and
It-
unescapable.
yeah, it's the crossbar is defined against the standing bar, like it's
Yeah,
got lines. It looks like two chunks of metal have been welded together. It
yeah.
is not subtle, it is not pretty, but it is iconic.
One thing in this scene before we kind of move on to getting towards the end of the episode a bit is something Angel says to Buffy in the alley. He says, "Truth is, I thought you'd be taller or all muscles and all that," commenting on Buffy's stature. because Sarah Michelle Gellar is like 5'2". She's very petite, both in height and she's just a very petite.
And bone structure is very delicate.
This first season, because she's only I think 18 in real life, 17 or 18, she still kind of has some of her child fat on
Yeah,
her. But in future seasons, I mean, she's very petite. She works out a lot and everything, so that's why.
yeah.
But it's there are times where you're like, she's so tiny, and that's one of the jokes, right? And then the fact that her name is Buffy, which is like a joke on, being buff and swole and everything. And what kind of name is that? It's silly. So it's like a load of
Yeah.
things.
I also like how Angel, though, he goes, I expected you'd be taller or have muscles, but then he kind of hits the back of his neck and he goes, you're pretty spry, though. And I think that sets up Buffy so well, is that she is aware of her limitations so that she has to think sideways about things. So she has to be quick, she has to be fast, she has to be creative, and
Mhm.
she has to be thinking outside the box. So in that scene, she knows that she might not be an immediate match for this big fella who's walking behind her. And
Mhm.
also, she might not want to just absolutely wail on a big fella for no particular reason, but something weird is going on. So she knows she has to do something. And so she creates this really interesting solution, which is gymnastic, which shows her physical prowess being utilized in this very creative and still very feminine way. I think that's worth noting with Buffy is that she is still a very feminine hero. They at no point fall into this kind of trap of having to masculinize her to make her strength believable.
Oh yeah,
She
no, I
just
mean it
is
actually
strong. And
goes
you
the
just go, yeah.
opposite in future seasons. And so yeah, those will definitely be commented on as well. But yeah, so this is showing Buffy's abilities, but also her femininity and grace and how this kind of merges
Yeah.
together
And her
into
style, yeah. So a
yeah.
kind of style of slayerness.
And also, is this when Angel tells her about the harvest when she talks to Giles later in the
That's
Bronx?
later. That's in the opening to
Okay. Um, so yeah, then at the end of the episode, like we have, the bronze, Cordelia, Buff, and things like that. But I know I'm conscientious of that we need to kind of
yeah, I
get
think
going. We have at the end a sermon by Luke that is so Buffy encounters Willow at the Bronze, and Willow, we find out, is in love with Xander. And she's like, oh, I thought that he would be here. And Buffy's kind of like, you just need to seize the day because tomorrow you might be dead. One of the iconic lines of the series. And then Buffy goes and sees Giles and talks to him. He's like, you need to hone. You need to like pay attention to find the vampires. And they're looking and they after these first two episodes they ease back, but Giles's closeness to Buffy and Willow throughout these episodes, like physical closeness, is a bit unsettling at times, and I think they realize that after the fact of like he can't lean over these teenage girls and
no.
like things. Buffy spots a vampire because his clothes are carbon copy dated. And then she discovers that the girl he's with is Willow. Buffy's like, I gotta save Willow from the vampire. And she ends up running into Cordelia and slamming her against a wall. So like Cordelia is like fucking weirdo. And so Buffy follows the vampire and Willow to a crypt or mausoleum in the cemetery and is like, I'm gonna kick your butt, basically, one of the first of many of Buffy's quipathon monologues to beat up the baddies. And Darla comes in with Willow and Xander's friend Jesse. He comes in after her and he's like, I think you gave me a hickey, even though he's very clearly like bitten on the neck. Buffy fights them. She's winning. Well, Darla runs away. The other guy gets dusted or slayed. Kapow sound. But then out of nowhere, Luke comes from behind Buffy with his deep voice. His just delivery of lines is so funny. She's fighting him. He's like, You're strong. And then he throws her across the room and he goes, I'm stronger.
I'm strong.
I'm stronger.
I'm strong. But with like, I can't do the depth,
I
the
can't get that deep.
inflectionlessness. It's like I'm strong. Like so, anyway, so Buffy gets hurled into this like tomb, this raised tomb, doesn't she?
Yeah, that's been opened like next to a body, and he starts sermonizing. And you've said part of the quote, but I have the whole thing here. So And like a plague of boils, the race of man covered the earth. I can't do that. And it shows cut to the library. Giles is going through because he knows about the harvest, kind of, or he's like looking, researching, and that becomes important later on. But on the third day of the newest light would come the harvest, and the blood of men will flow as wine, when the master will walk among them once more. The earth will belong to the old ones, and hell itself will come to town. Amen.
Amen.
And so it's very biblical and Byronic language. It's very over the top. It's very parable, but just a quick aside because you mentioned the amen earlier. And it's really interesting that we have the vampires saying amen because, it's so related with the liturgy and after the proclamations and everything. So Luke is quite literally sermonizing, like, the master will rise, let it be so. Yeah, the earth will belong to the old ones, and hell itself will come to town. I mean, we're on a Hellmouth. Arguably, hell's already in town.
It's so interesting as well in his speech. Like I always found that really jarring that he has all this blood and death and the old ones and terror and rising, and then hell will come to town. I'm like, town? Like that's so like I know that they're like referencing Sunnydale and the Hellmouth,
Yeah.
really localizing it, but I always thought that that was like really like so someone in the next city over doesn't have to worry so much because
Yeah,
it's like you have all this thunder and then you put it in this teeny tiny teacup right at the end. And I'm like, oh, you should have just gone like, and hell itself will descend from the sky or rise from the earth.
yeah, yeah. And as Luke's saying that, he after the amen, he then like leans over to bite Buffy on the
Yeah,
neck, and
Buffy.
he's
Yeah.
laying terrified in this, kind of
Often,
coffin,
yeah,
and
next to
then
a
it
corpse.
cuts and it says to be continued. Alex, we're only at the harvest, and we've been talking for ages.
So much. There is so much to say. I mean, maybe this is a good opportunity for us to say to be continued as well. Because I know that I, for one, like I'm really interested in the concept of the old ones. And we haven't even begun to unpack the cosmology of Buffy and the Buffyverse. Where
Yes.
it's like just there's not enough time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Because yeah, we haven't gotten into so many juicy bits. And I think also we have learned that going beat by beat is maybe not the best approach.
Yes.
Your
Yeah.
listeners riding the wave with us. Thank you for
Yeah.
your patience.
We learn and hopefully it's entertaining as we go. But yes, I think listeners and potentially watchers, we have too much to say for beat by beat. The nerdery takes over, and we might find ways to kind of focus up what we cover in future.
It's all
Because
a process. But before we, kind of sign off officially, we have scene stealers
Scene
or character
Stealers.
deceit. And so this is our opportunity to talk about things that steal the scenes. So it could be a character, it could be an outfit, it could be
A
a
set design,
yeah,
a
so it's
song.
very much open to whatever it is we want. So Alex, I will let you go first.
Oh, I have to decline. Surely I went first with the quote at the beginning.
Okay. Well, it's just because mine's not that good because my scene stealer is Luke.
Oh,
Because, um, kind of spoiler, but we have a limited time with Luke, and just every scene that he's in is so dramatic and over the top, and I love it so much. And yeah, I just kind of there were other like small bits, of course, another one for me, scene stealer, is just Giles's reaction when he first sees Buffy in the library, and she's like, "Oh, I'm here for a book." And he's like, "I know exactly what you need." And he's so excited. And then he like reaches and just, the iconic vampire text that's big and fat and very gothic looking.
old.
And dust kind of goes everywhere. And he's just so thrilled. And then Buffy is horrified and his mood completely changes. And I love that enthusiasm of Giles, especially in these early seasons when he gets so excited, like um, at the end of the harvest. But I guess we'll talk about that next week. But when he's like, oh, there will be more to be done. And they're kind of like, Giles, chill, man. My scene stealer is Luke, but then, small aside addendum of Giles
Of
pulling.
Giles. I love it. I think that big slam of the book really sums up Giles in the first season of he's arrived to do a job and he expects Buffy to be on board. and he finds this frustrated, disaffected teenage girl, and they have to navigate that dynamic. And I
Yeah,
think
she just she runs away, and
and
it's
she's
just
like,
like, absolutely not.
no, not for me. Okay, so my original scene stealer, because I thought we were doing the two-parter, comes in the second episode, I think. So I'm going to leave that potentially for next week. I'm going to revise my scene stealer, and I am going to say the corpse in the locker. Now, two reasons for the corpse in the locker, and it's because it kind of really helps crystallize some of the things about vampires and the Buffyverse in high school. So corpse in the locker, I love because it means that Darla decided to cause the most chaos possible. She could
Yes.
have just left him in the hall. She could have dragged him outside with her and hidden the body. But she decided to create this jack in the box of death, knowing that someone would find it in the worst way. And I love that that just kind of sets up the vampires as mischievous to a certain extent. Like they are demonic, but they're not the big, evil, demonic creatures. Like Salem's Lot that Buffy draws
Yeah.
on often has that kind of Dracula emphasis of it's a big evil, a vampire can
Mhm.
ruin everything for everyone. But Buffy, knowing that it's going to have regular interactions with vampires, decides to make them almost like the teenagers of the demon world itself. Like they will
Yeah.
just fuck around and
They love
find
to play games. And
exactly.
yeah, and we'll see that with the master, especially as we
Yeah.
continue.
So I loved that because it shows something about Darla, it shows something about the vampires themselves. And then there's also this great moment where Cordelia comes and says, Jim's cancelled, they found a corpse. And Buffy goes, "Are there marks? Was it bitten? Was it bloody?" And Cordelia just goes, "Morbid much?" and walks away.
I didn't ask. Like, why would I ask that?
Oh, and it
It
just
also
shows,
introduces in the series, like, people don't give a fuck about all the deaths that
no,
happen on a high school campus or
yeah,
elsewhere. There are no police, just kind
nope.
of like, oh,
It
that's
just
routine in Sunnydale.
glances right off them.
Yeah.
But it kind of shows that Buffy can't escape her destiny. And
Yeah.
also, she doesn't want to. Like, she is a good and a noble person. Even though she hates what this destiny is doing to her, she is still going, I need to fix that. There's
Yeah.
a corpse. I need to sort this out. And that's what leads her back to Giles after the book slam moment. And she's like, the fuck, man, I have to be involved in this now. Typical. Yeah.
That's a great one, Alex. I'm glad that you did that. And I am so excited for our now part two, the to be
Yes.
continued of the first episode. I guess we should wrap up kind of with our outro of just where we can be found and things like that. So I'm Megan. You can find me on social media. So on Instagram at morbid.may, and May is spelled Mae. I do have a bookshop affiliate website that you can find on both my Instagram bio as well as on our fledgling website. Or if you just went to bookshop.org and typed in, like in the shops, Meaghan Allen. And the cool thing about Bookshop is that it supports independent booksellers. So it's, like an Amazon or something where you buy books online, but the money goes to independent booksellers and keeps them going. So those are my little bits, Alex.
Fantastic. So, yes, you can find me on social media. I also lurk a lot on Instagram. So, you can find me either using my name or you can look for Decadence and Dark Ages. That's my Instagram handle. So, I do a lot of art history. You can also find me at literatureunlocked.org, which is where I do creative writing workshops. I do online lectures.
Mock vivas and all sorts of supporting things.
Yes, I do creative writing, editing, academic writing, editing, and mock writers and all sorts. So you can find me there too. I do have a LinkedIn and stuff, but I'm terrible at it. I find LinkedIn is a little bit too happy, shiny corporate, and I
Yeah.
don't like that. So I prefer things to be a little bit messy.
But yeah, so dear listeners, thank you so much for going on this Mr. Toad's Wild Ride with us.
Yeah.
And we will figure this out as we go along. We'll get more organized, a bit tighter in expressing our ideas. But yeah, with that, until next time, I'm Megan,
I'm Alex.
and this is Dames Macabre.
Woo.
Woo!